In today's video, we have the latest on some trade talk from around the NHL. We're going to discuss a potential couple trade targets for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We also have some updates on Erik Karlsson, as well as some other San Jose Sharks that could be on the move. Plus, we have some trade talk around the Washington Capitals and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Lots of roster moves as well. A couple of key milestones in the NHL as of late, too. We'll discuss all that and another update on Sens ownership coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade talk to take a look at here today. Now, before we jump into the news here today, just wanted to remind you again, like we talked about yesterday, that of course we're partnered here at Top Shelf Hockey with Fanatics. Of course, Fanatics, a great spot to get all your NHL merchandise. And as of yesterday, the Fanatics store online now has the second edition of the NHL Reverse Retros. I'll show you a picture here with a lot of the designs that are out. We've seen many of the teams, not all of course, but a fair bit of them now have had a game where they've used them in game action. Of course, they've been sold exclusively through the NHL site, but now available here through Fanatics. So certainly, if you want to consider supporting the Top Shelf Hockey channel, and at the same time getting yourself a great deal on a new Reverse Retro or any other NHL merchandise, certainly consider using our affiliate link down below here in the pinned comment, as well as in the description of this video, and check out and consider using that to get your NHL merchandise. First up, let's talk about some injuries and some roster updates here. The Toronto Maple Leafs today activated goalie Joseph Woll, and he's been assigned to the American Hockey League. He's been out since the beginning of the season, so certainly nice to see them get their goaltending depth a little bit more in order. Of course, Matt Murray recently returned, has played well in a couple of games. Samsonov's not quite ready to return yet, probably going to be about another week, but to get Woll back in there, of course, Erik Källgren's back up at the NHL roster, still waiting for Samsonov to return. They still have Petruzzelli, so at least they have a little bit more depth and some more options here now. So we'll see how things go there. But I know for Woll, he's faced a lot of injuries in his young career. Hopefully he can get things back on track. At one point, he was highly regarded as a potential goalie of the future. We'll see where that goes once he gets a chance to get into some game action. Staying with the Leafs, defenseman TJ Brodie is going to be out longer than expected. He's battling an oblique injury and was hoping to be back for their upcoming 4-game road trip. But unfortunately, things have not progressed the way they were hoping, and he's not going to travel with the team, so he will miss the entire road trip by the looks of things here. The Montreal Canadiens have also activated defenseman Michael Matheson, so he's back in action. The Ducks also got back defenseman Kevin Shattenkirk as well. The LA Kings have recalled a trio of players, including Elias Anderson, Rasmus Kupari, and Jacob Mouvrier. So certainly a variety of players getting more opportunities. As I mentioned, we also have couple of key milestones that have taken place here in the last couple of days. Marian Hossa had his jersey retirement night last night in Chicago, so certainly a big night. Obviously, Hossa was a heck of a hockey player, one of the greatest two-way players, really strong, sturdy guy, real solid at both ends of the ice. Certainly started his career with the Ottawa Senators, played with a few other teams, but ended up having the most team success at the very least in Chicago, of course, being part of their multiple Stanley Cup championship victories earlier towards the end of his career. So Hossa, well-deserved retirement jersey in Chicago, so there will no longer be another number 81 in Chicago. So I want to congratulate him on that well-deserved accomplishment. And Evgeny Malkin of the Pittsburgh Penguins had his 1,000th career game last night. Of course, he's missed a fair bit of games over the years due to various injuries. He rarely puts up an 82-game campaign. Otherwise, this milestone would have come a fair bit sooner. Certainly a guy like Crosby has hit this milestone a while back. So it goes to show you how much time Malkin has missed over the years. But they turned it into a very memorable evening. I think it's fair to say that most players have a very memorable 1,000th game, but it started in pregame warm-ups where the entire team was going through Malkin's stretching routine with him on the ice, kind of mimicking his every move. Certainly, looked like they were having a lot of fun with him out there, and it was certainly a funny moment to watch for Malkin and his teammates going through that. And then, of course, before the game as well, Malkin actually had a nice, pleasant surprise with his young son being brought into the dressing room to read the starting lineup for the game. And, of course, his dad, Gino Malkin, was in the starting lineup. So he didn't know that was going to happen. So they surprised him. It was a very emotional moment. both for Malkin himself and his young son Nikita. It was a great moment. I'm glad to see the Penguins have captured all that on camera and shared it with the public. It's very touching times. So certainly congrats to him on a great career, one of the greatest Penguins, and of course, an all-time NHLer as well. I certainly have no doubt Malkin will more than likely be a Hall of Famer by the time he's all said and done. Some more rumblings around the Ottawa Senators and their ownership situation. We know that there's a variety of groups that have been forming and are likely going to be getting into the bidding process sometime here in the next couple of weeks. I know Elliotte Friedman talked about this again today on the latest 32 Thoughts podcast that came out, talking a bit more about Ryan Reynolds. Of course, we know that those Ryan Reynolds rumors are not just rumors. They're indeed very true. Reynolds himself has been very public and open about his interest. Of course, Friedman goes on to say in today's podcast too that he's had a lot of different meetings with a lot of different people about this. So certainly he's talked to a lot of his own people, whether it's, certainly, business people that he trusts, of course, the financial side of things. And it sounds like he's met with a lot of different groups as well, because we know Reynolds will not be the primary owner. That's going to take somebody with deep pockets, preferably a billionaire, to be the main majority owner. Reynolds is certainly more than capable of being, a minority shareholder for sure, and be part of like a larger group or consortium to be, a part owner of this team. It's like with the Seattle Kraken, obviously had a few local celebrities be, jump into the ownership game as well, like Macklemore, for example, is a part owner of the Kraken there. It just really helps with the publicity and kind of helping grow the sport and possibly get the sport in front of some more people and, fans of these celebrities. And another celebrity that's rumored to be interested here is musical artist The Weeknd. I'm sure most of you know him. Of course, he's a very well-known, very successful Canadian musician. He will possibly be interested in getting into this here as well. Of course, Elliotte Friedman and Jeff Merrick said it's a story that they've been chasing over the weekend, on the weekend, about the weekend. So certainly they were not at a point yet where they can kind of confirm that there's definite interest. He has not gone public like Ryan Reynolds has, so it's not 100% confirmed, but all of the sources that they've spoken with said it sure sounds like it is. And it said even though he's a Toronto guy, he does have some strong connections to Ottawa as well. So they believe that it's likely true, but still trying to chase that and confirm. So yet another, Canadian celebrity that could be in the mix there. Again, another guy who's been incredibly successful, certainly a multi-millionaire, but not deep pockets enough to buy the team on his own. But like Ryan Reynolds, could add, another celebrity name to a group to really help get, an ownership group that's not only wealthy, but well-known publicly in a variety of different methods to get, to try to grow the game and grow the interest in the team and the fan base. So certainly, interesting to hear that. Now, on to the trade section of the day. Certainly lots of news today, most of which comes from the latest 32 Thoughts podcast update from Friedman and Merrick. We want to start talking first about the Pittsburgh Penguins. They said that Ron Hextall is definitely looking to make some moves. Now, the information they had on the Penguins wasn't as specific as we've heard about some other teams here, but Friedman said he's been told by a variety of NHL executives around the league that Ron Hextall is certainly scouring the market, making lots of inquiries, and is interested in making some moves. That it looks like he's more than anything trying to get a good feel of what is available out there. Like I said, he didn't, mention any specific names or specific, players on the Pens roster that very well could be moved, although we have talked about some of them before that have been mentioned, enough recently that I'm sure if he could have his way, Ron Hextall would probably love to move Kasperi Kapanen. They do have more than enough defensemen, so it's possible you could see a D-man, included here. And there's a few others that are questionable as well. I've heard Teddy Bluger's name maybe be a player they'd be willing to part with as well, depending on the return and what they could, make other upgrades. Hard to say exactly what they do, but the Penguins, of course, certainly had a good night last night in Chicago, being part of that game with the Marin Hossa, retirement jersey, and of course Malcolm 1000's game. To have that all in one game is certainly interesting for sure. But they won that game, of course, and they've had an okay start to their season, but I don't think that Penguins management is completely happy with this team. They've certainly committed a lot of money, a lot of term to this core group to continue on, but the surrounding kind of, complementary pieces, so to speak, might need to be tweaked here to give this team a better chance heading into the later part of the season. Of course, their division rival, Washington Capitals, are kind of in a similar boat. There's different rumors about some Capitals players possibly being available here as well. Certainly a team that has struggled. I know I kind of wondered going into the season if a team like Washington, I even kind of thought the same about the Pittsburgh Penguins, eventually these teams are going to regress and take a step back and not necessarily be a contender and not maybe even miss the playoffs. At some point, obviously Crosby and Ovechkin are still playing at a pretty high level, but do they have the surrounding pieces with their teams to continue being, a consistent playoff team? That's, up for grabs here and soon to be determined. I think the Penguins have a much better possibility of that happening. I like the Penguins, surrounding players around Crosby more so than what the Washington Capitals have surrounded Ovechkin with, especially considering all the players that are out with injuries right now. So if the Capitals can get themselves back into the race, a couple of names that have been mentioned in the rumor mill that very well could be had, especially later into the season as teams want to add more depth pieces to their rosters. A player like Connor Sheary, of course, a former Penguin as well, somebody who's had a lot of battles within the Metro Division during playoffs over the years. Certainly doesn't have an expensive contract and could be an interesting player. Another guy that's been mentioned as well is Lars Eller in Washington as well. Both guys, you're not looking at much, not an expensive contract, not much term. So it makes sense that maybe they decide that a few of these players can be moved on from, and it's best to get an asset in return because they're likely not going to be re-signed for next year and beyond anyway. So the Capitals and Penguins both are going to be interesting to watch in that front. And San Jose, Elliot Friedman goes on to say that all the talk around Erik Karlsson so far does certainly seem to be legit, with the fact that Mike Grier has made it known that they're willing to entertain just about anything except for maybe Thomas Hertl. But at this point, he says Erik Karlsson has not been asked to waive his no-move clause. Nothing is really anywhere close or that far along, which is not a surprise on my part. I certainly think that they're basically at a point where they're in preliminary discussions and they're kind of mulling over, is this something that's reasonable that we could do and should we do it? Meanwhile, at the same time, talking to other teams saying, make us some offers that we can kind of mull over and consider. Friedman says essentially at this point, they're kind of trying to gauge the market, determine how much money they would have to retain, determine if they feel that is sufficient or worthwhile in pursuing a trade, and what kind of return they could get if they did that. Because obviously, there's a lot of question marks to determine what they really need to do in this case. If they have to eat too much money, should they not just have him play for them instead? That's the question that needs to be answered here. And of course, the Sharks are the only ones that will know the answer before the rest of us do. But at the same time, like I said, it's interesting for them to kind of engage in conversations, see what teams are wanting them to do in the contract retention, and at the same time talk and get some feelers about what returns might look like. And then they can kind of start to weigh things out. Could it be possible that Erik Karlsson is traded before the deadline? I think it certainly is possible, but given the mammoth nature of his contract, it will be a little bit more tricky, obviously, than a lot of players. It's not like it's 1 year. It's not like it's a Jonathan Toews or Patrick Kane situation here. We're talking 4 years left with an AAV of $11.5 million. So even at 50%, yes, it's good value for what you're going to get out of Erik Karlsson, but it also might be tricky for teams to handle. And of course, the more the Sharks retain, the more they're going to want for a return package. So it's going to be tricky, but we're not quite there just yet. When it comes to another member of the Sharks decor, though, that's generating some interest, it doesn't mean they're going to move him, but certainly a player who's in his mid-20s, a little younger than Karlsson, certainly not quite as dynamic, but Mario Ferrero, has worked his way up to being a pretty solid D-man for the Sharks as well over the past few years. And there is some interest in him too. Doesn't mean the Sharks are going to move him. We know, like I said, that they're willing to entertain offers on most players on the roster. They're bound to kind of accept this, potential rebuild that they're going to be going through here and see what they can get for some of these players. It makes sense for them to analyze that throughout the year and kind of make some decisions. But given the fact he makes a lot less money than Karlsson, he obviously has less term and certainly, much younger. you'd have to think that the interest is higher because more teams could entertain taking a player of his caliber on. So another player in San Jose to certainly keep your eye on. When it comes to the Maple Leafs, Elliotte Friedman and Jeff Marek certainly linked the Leafs with a couple of different players in today's podcast. Doesn't mean, of course, that either player is going to be traded for, but certainly a couple of names that's been linked and seem interesting for them to pick up. One of them being defenseman Connor Timmins, currently with the Arizona Coyotes. Of course, Timmins, as I mentioned in the last couple of days, is a player that's kind of expected the Coyotes might move and might want and would benefit from a fresh start. Unfortunately for Timmins, he's battled a lot of injuries in his young career and certainly has only played 8 games in Arizona, even though he's been there a while. Of course, he was one of the main prospects in the assets going to the Coyotes when the Avalanche picked up goaltender Darcy Kemper. Of course, he went on to win a Stanley Cup with the Avalanche and has now moved on to the Washington Capitals via free agency. But Timmins has not got a chance to do a lot in Arizona because of the injuries, but he's getting close to the point where he's healthy again and ready to make an impact, and the Leafs apparently have some interest. We know that they've had some injuries, of course, on the blue line with Brody being out right now. Of course, he won't be out for too long, but still he has been out. The Muzzin injury appears to be season-ending, but we don't know that for 100% for sure. And Timmins is not a player that's going to cost a lot of money. Now, the connection here as well that makes the Leafs interested, of course, is like most players that they seem to be linked to, is the connection to the Sioux Greyhounds from the Ontario Hockey League and the Junior League here in Canada and the OHL. So certainly no shocker there. It seems like anybody that's been connected to other players or the Keith Dubas combo here from their days in the OHL seem to get linked to this team. Of course, Timmins was teammates and I believe even the partners for at times with Rasmus Sandin. So certainly, two guys who could possibly play together, who are familiar with each other, and could be a good fit there. The thing with Timmins is the ability to stay healthy. Timmins, of course, is also an Ontario-born player, so certainly probably wouldn't be opposed to it from him. From a family perspective, it probably would work really well. At this point in his career, though, I don't really think we can call Connor Timmins an impact defenseman. It could be an interesting, younger, still kind of prospect player to pick up for them to add to the mix here. Obviously, outside of some of your veteran players, when it comes to your 6, 7, 8 kind of guys on the depth chart here, you don't have a lot. You have Jordy Ben, you have Victor Mete, but you can never have too many D, and maybe he's a player that they want to add to that mix. So it's interesting to see how things go, but he could be a name to watch. And another one is Frankie Vatrano at the Anaheim Ducks, a left shot scoring forward. We know that the Maple Leafs have been relatively pleased this year with their big four. Fair to say that at times they've had good seasons for sure. Matthews isn't quite scoring at that record pace he was last year. Still getting good numbers and good results overall, though. The problem in Toronto, in my opinion, is the mix of the third and fourth lines and the depth pieces of the surrounding complementary pieces in the forward group just haven't been quite giving them, at least not consistently, the scoring that they would probably like to have. They've had numerous changes within their lineup and within those bottom lines, and add another player who could be a good role player, good secondary scoring kind of player, and Vatrano, who's not making a ton of money, might be an excellent pickup. Of course, he went last year from Florida to the Rangers, had a real solid run with the Rangers before leaving via free agency, going to Anaheim. Now, Friedman was told that even at 50%, they may have a hard time affording Vatrano, but doesn't mean Anaheim wouldn't consider taking a contract back, right? So I do wonder what they would consider trading for him. They would likely have to move a player off their roster that would at least be equivalent to 50% of Vatrano's salary to make it more feasible for that to happen. But there's certainly a couple of names out there that could be some interesting, good young depth pieces here for the Maple Leafs to add as we get later into the season. Now, at this point, it's fair to say they're probably all looking at the Boston Bruins as being the cream of the crop in that division, which is certainly, I think, still for some a little bit surprising, but it is what it is. That team is an absolute juggernaut right now and appears to be the favorites in the Atlantic Division, so they're going to have a tough time again getting a good positioning for the regular season to get into the playoffs and to get through those playoffs to have any damage. I'd be interested to see if this can be the year that the Leafs finally win a series, and I'm not sure who they're going to end up getting matched up against right now. It's really early to say. So we'll have to stay tuned. But could the Maple Leafs add Vatrano and or Connor Timmins? Those ideas make sense. Do you see them being good additions to the team? What kind of trades do you think are reasonable? Not only from a trade perspective and what they need to give up, but to make the money work as well, to work and be successful with the cap confinements that they're up against. Let me know your thoughts on that. We'll discuss further down in the comments. Of course, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.